Some Jewish rules for living from the book of Ecclesiasticus. Number 1, respect yourself.
My child, in all modesty, keep your self-respect and value yourself at your true worth. For who will speak up for you if you are your own enemy? Who will respect you if you disparage yourself?
But be honest about your shortcomings too.
Have a proper sense of your own ignorance and never be ashamed to admit your mistakes.
Be careful who you listen to.
Accept a greeting from everyone, but advise only from 1 in 1,000.
And be thoughtful also in what you say.
Speak, it is your privilege, but come to the point and don't interrupt the music.
Incidentally, that was from the book of Ecclesiasticus, which is different from Ecclesiastes. And I mentioned that because Teresa was trying to find, she had the quotes, the passages, and she looked them up in Ecclesiastes, and they didn't agree. Ecclesiasticus is a separate book from Ecclesiastes, and it's in the Catholic Bible, but not in Protestant Bibles. So there you have it. Little known and less cared about facts. Okay, a reading from Robert Fulghum's book. It was on fire when I lay down on it. Fulghum is the one who wrote All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten and a lot of other interesting books. So he writes, somewhere out there in the world is a young woman who, if she reads this letter that follows, will sing out, hey, that's me, that's my story. This letter is written out of gratitude from me and all those who have heard her story from me. Out of one person's moment of cosmic despair has come perspective for all. Dear fellow pilgrim, there you were, Hong Kong airport, end of the summer of 1984, tensely occupying a chair next to mine. Everything about you said, young American traveler going home. The backpack beside you, bulged with mysterious souvenirs of seeing the world. Lucky kid, I thought. But when the tears began to drip from your chin, you drew me into your sadness. I guess you had been very alone and very brave for some time. A good cry was in order. And weep you did, all over me. You had run out of money, and your friends had run out of money, and so here you were, having spent 2 days waiting in the airport standby with little to eat and too much pride to beg. And your plane was about to go, and you had lost your ticket. You cried all over me again. You had been sitting in this one spot for 3 hours, sinking into the cold sea of despair. And at moments you thought you would sit there until you died. After we dried you off, I and a nice older couple from Chicago offered to take you to lunch and talk to the powers that be at the airlines about some remedy. You stood up to go with us, turned around to pick up your belongings, and screamed. I thought you'd been shot. But no, it was your ticket. You found your ticket. You had been sitting on it for 3 hours. You laughed and cried and hugged us all and were suddenly gone, off to catch a plane for home and what next, leaving most of the passenger lounge deliriously limp from being part of your drama. I've told this story countless times. She was sitting on her own ticket, I conclude, and the listeners always laughed in painful self-recognition. Often when I've been sitting on my own ticket in some way, sitting on whatever it is I have that will get me to what's coming up next, I think of you, and I grin at both of us and get moving. So thanks. You have become in a special way my travel agent. May you find all your tickets and arrive wherever it is you want to go, now and always. That's the Greek. So I say to you today that every one of you is sitting on a ticket that can take you to a wonderful place, if you'll just get off your rear end and find it. Each of you has a ticket to Mensch, which is that state of being which is the greatest treasure you possess. Only you sit on it too much of the time. I'll explain in a moment what Mensch means, but first I'd like to tell you a little bit about the language it comes from. Yiddish, the language of the European Jews from about 1000 AD to the mid-1900s. Yiddish is not the same as Hebrew. All right, Hebrew is the Bible language. Yiddish is not the same as Hebrew, though it has some Hebrew words in it. Hebrew was the language of the ancient Jews, and it's the language of the Jewish Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament. But the Jews stopped speaking Hebrew around 600 BC. In Babylonia, they learned Aramaic, and they never spoke Hebrew again except in religious ceremonies. Until 1948, when they decided to revive it and make it the language of the state of Israel, the new state. And Jews generally spoke whatever languages of the people, the lands that they happened to live in. But around the year 1000, the Jews in the West began to speak a dialect of German that eventually became a common language for them. It was mostly German, but partly Hebrew and partly Slavic, and eventually partly English. It was called Yiddish, from Yid, an old German word meaning Jew. And it's amazing how many Yiddish words have gradually made their way into English. I read somewhere that there are over 500 Yiddish words in Webster's Unabridged Dictionary. But maybe even more significant has been the Yiddish effect on English syntax and word order. The following phrases are a few examples of Yiddish English, or Yinglish. All right already. Okay by me. It shouldn't happen to a dog. On her, it looks good. This I need like a hole in the head. He knows from nothing. I should be so lucky. Or how often have you heard someone repeat a word but with an SH in front of it, like fat, schmat, as long as you're happy. Or Vassar, schmasser, she's still a schlub. One of my favorite stories is the one about the mother who is commiserating with her friend Sheila. She's commiserating about her grown-up son. She says, Sheila, I don't know what to do. My son, a psychiatrist he's seeing, and the psychiatrist is telling him, Arnold, you've got an Oedipus complex. And Sheila says, Oedipus, schmedipus, as long as he loves his mother. There are some Yiddish words that have become pretty standard English expressions, like klutz, chutzpah, schmaltz, schnoz, or even schnozola, if you have a particularly significant one. And one of my favorites, schmooze, meaning to have a heart-to-heart chat, as in they had a little schmooze and settled everything. But one Yiddish word that I don't think has gotten the familiarity it deserves is Mensch. In German, the word Mensch simply means a person or a human being. But in Yiddish, it has very positive overtones, and it means something like a real human being, or a truly good and caring person. As in, a größer Eulen und nicht so kein Mensch. A big crowd, but not a single human being. Now, one way to see what a Mensch is to see what a Mensch is not. A Mensch is not a nebech or nebish. A nebish is someone who is dissatisfied and feels cheated all the time, has nothing positive to contribute to any situation. And there's an old Yiddish proverb that says, better 10 enemies than one nebish. And Jean Houston, in her book, in case you might want to check it out sometime, The Possible Human, catalogs some typical nebbish attitudes which might help you get a sense of what this character is like. The nebbish says, nobody really wants me. It's just that I'm the only one around. Or, why go to the movies? If it's any good, you can't get in. Don't learn too much. The less you know about what you're missing, the better off you'll be. But probably not, you'll still be wondering anyway. So why are you phoning me? Are you just trying to avoid the ironing? There's an old expression, into every life some rain must fall, but some people install their own sprinkler systems. That pretty much describes the Nebush. He rains on his own parade. Probably the best description of the Nebush can be found in the Yiddish proverb that goes, when a Nebush leaves the room, you feel as if someone came in. Have you ever had that experience? No. They leave and suddenly, oh. Yiddish has a lot of other words for pitiful people, like shlemiel, which means someone who's always blaming others for their misfortune. Schlemazel, which means something like a born loser. As the Yiddish proverb puts it, a schlemazel fällt öfen Rücken und zerbricht sich die Nase. A schmazel falls on his back and breaks his nose. And then there's schlock, schlump, schemendrick, schnook, you get the idea. But the Mensch is just the opposite. The Mensch expects things to turn out okay, and when they don't, he or she finds something positive in it anyway. Like the driver who just misses a green light and has to wait until the light turns green again. She just smiles and says, great, now I'll be the first in line. A Mensch, a real human being, is someone who's a blessing wherever she goes. She is by nature caring and careful, and usually isn't even aware of what a Mensch she is. Here's a description from an 85-year-old woman. My mama was a Mensch. Such power, such pizzazz she had, you wouldn't believe. But how did she use it? Like an angel already. By now, of course, you realize that there are very few full-time Mensches around, but there's probably a little Mensch in everyone, and probably more in you than you think. If only you'll stop sitting on it. You've got a ticket to Mensch in you. Get it out and fly. And help you see how you might do that. I'd like to tell you what Rabbi Hillel said 2,000 years ago in the Perky Quoth. That's from the Jewish Talmud, a commentary on the Bible. And I think it's a recipe for Menschness. Rabbi Hillel said, if I am not from myself, who will be? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Let's take those one by one. If I am not for myself, who will be? A Mensch respects himself. He cares about who he is and what he stands for. As we heard in the reading from Ecclesiasticus, my child, in all modesty, keep your self-respect and value yourself at your true worth. For who will speak up for you if you are your own enemy? Who will respect you if you disparage yourself? A Mensch knows that no one else can hand you a blueprint for your life. No book can either. As the famed Rabbi Azusia put it, on the judgment day, God will not ask, why wasn't I Moses? Rather, God will ask me, why wasn't I Azusia? No one can tell you to be a Moses or a Mother Teresa. You can't live their lives. You can't live your mother's or father's life either. Your life, according to your values, is the only one you can live. I think of one of Fred Allen's lines. He was a comic from last century. He said, I can't understand why a person would spend a year writing a novel when you can buy one for a few bucks. Well, a Mensch knows that it's worth writing your own story because insight isn't borrowed from someone else. So a Mensch knows that the real treasure is to be found in yourself, but he or she also knows that if you keep it to yourself, it ceases to be a treasure. If I am only for myself, what am I? There's another story from the Talmud that tells about how God decided where to locate his or her holy city, Jerusalem, where the temple would be built. Time before time, says the Talmud, when the world was young, there were two brothers who shared a field and a mill. Each night they divided the grain they had ground together, evenly. One brother lived alone, and the other had a large family. Now the single brother thought to himself one day, it really isn't fair that we divide the grain evenly. I have only myself to care for, but my brother has children to feed. So each night he secretly took some of his grain and put it in his brother's granary. But the married brother said to himself, It isn't fair that we divide the grain evenly, because I have children to provide for me in my old age, but my brother doesn't. So he began every night to take some of his grain and put it in his brother's granary. And then one night, they met each other halfway between their two houses, and they suddenly realized what they had been doing. And then what could they do but embrace each other in love? And the legend is that God witnessed the meeting and proclaimed, "This is a holy place, and this is where my temple shall be built." And so it was that the first temple was constructed in Jerusalem. If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? A rabbi was walking along with some of his students when one asked, "Rabbi, when should a person repent?" And the rabbi replied, "You should repent on the last day of your life." And the student said, well, Rabbi, we can't be sure which will be our last day. And the rabbi smiled and said, then the answer is simple. Recapture your heart today. A Mensch doesn't wait around for the right opportunity to come along. She makes the present opportunity the right one. And she doesn't dwell on all the possible problems that may come her way. You know, like the little kid who in school who had it good but was a nervous wreck just the same. And the kid's teacher said, "What are you so worried about? You come to school so worried." And he said, "My parents. My mom and dad work all day to keep me clothed, and they're working overtime to be able to send me to college. And on the days that they're not working outside the home, they spend all day cooking and cleaning and shopping, so I have nothing to worry about." Well then, said the teacher, "Why are you worried?" And the boy said, "I'm afraid they might try to escape." A Mensch knows that you can't protect yourself from every possible problem, and the only thing worrying about the future can do is keep you from being a Mensch in the present. There's a Hasidic story I particularly like. This is about a Russian rabbi at the turn of the last century who studied and prayed for many years and pondered the mysteries of the universe and all the deepest religious questions. And at one point, he came to the conclusion that he didn't really know where he was going in his life. The next morning, he got up early and was walking across the town square when he met the town Cossack, or police officer. This officer happened to be in a bad mood, so he thought he'd take it out on the rabbi. And he said, "Hey, Rabbi, where do you think you're going?" And the rabbi turned to him and said, "Quite honestly, frankly, I don't know." And this made the Cossack angry. He said, "Every morning, at exactly this time, you cross the square on your way to the synagogue to pray. You're going to tell me you don't know where you're going? Well, I'll teach you to make a fool out of me." And he grabbed the rabbi and threw him in jail. And just as he was about to leave, the rabbi said, "I told you the truth, didn't I? I said I didn't know where I was going, and here I am in jail. Turns out I really didn't know where I was going." And since you don't ever know where you may end up, you need to start with the present moment. What can I do now? How can I be a Mensch today? Whether I'm in a Russian jail cell or a rented space in a country club, or whether I'm at home with family or out among strangers, what can I do that will bring out the best in others? What can I give that, if I don't give, might not happen? And you don't have to have a set of plans in order to carry this out. What you do need is a decision on your part, a decision that this is the kind of person you want to be today. When you get up in the morning, you say, today will be a Mensch day. And then you let things take their course. And the opportunity will come. Someone you're normally short with, or whom you regularly ignore, you will ask to see how they're doing. Or you'll notice something positive in them and you'll bring it to their attention. If you normally dominate a conversation or try to impress people with how bright you are, you'll listen more and bring others out. A Mensch looks for the brightness in the other, and then that helps that other to recognize it too. So you see, one definition says, a Mensch is someone who sees the Mensch in you. And one of the nice things about Mensches is that they don't even have to be particularly smart or learned to be one. All you need is a little spirit, a little chutzpah, a willingness to give it your best shot. like the Jewish janitor who, according to legend, saved her people when the Pope tried to evict all the Jews from Rome. Some of you may know this story. The setting is the Middle Ages. The advisors to the Pope say, "Your Holiness, it is wrong that so many Jews live here in Rome, practicing their religion and refusing to believe in Christ, right here in the center of the Christian church. You must tell them, convert or be banished." Well, when the Jews heard about the edict that's about to be drawn up, they begged the Pope to let them stay. They say, "Our religion is different from yours, but it is no less deeply held." So the Pope makes them a proposition. He says, let's have a debate to see who has a deeper faith. You pick a representative from among you, and I myself will represent the church. And further, the debate is to be done in pantomime. If you win, you get to stay. If I win, out you go. Well, everyone in the Jewish community is quite upset. Who among them could debate the Pope, especially since the Pope will be participant and judge? All their greatest rabbis and most learned scholars decline the Pope's proposition. For who, after all, would want to be blamed for getting the Jewish community expelled? Well, after all the worthy leaders had declined, and it seems there's no one who is willing to take on the Pope's challenge, one little voice in the back of the crowd is heard. It is a woman's voice. No rabbi was she, not in those days. No scholar either. Women were not allowed to study the Talmud. She is the local synagogue's janitor, but also a mensch. Well, it is highly unusual to let an uneducated woman janitor be the Jewish representative, but since no one else has volunteered, the chief rabbi says, what have we got to lose? So they send her to the debate the Pope. So the day arrives. The Pope is sitting on his golden throne, surrounded by his cardinals and bishops in all their crimson robes, facing this little Jewish cleaning lady. And the Pope begins. He does this, makes this big circle. And she goes, points to the throne. He looks a little surprised, and then he says, and she goes. And then he takes out an apple, and she takes out a piece of matzah, which you have during Passover. And he says, okay, you win. And he leaves, and she goes back to her people. And the people who watched the pantomime couldn't quite follow what really happened here, but the cardinals said, Your Excellency, you know, what really happened? We couldn't follow the debate. And the Pope says, well, I pointed a finger around to indicate that God created the heavens. But the janitor lady went like this to say God created the earth too. And then I said, there was only one God. And she said, I thought you believed in the Trinity. And then I took out an apple to show that some people think the earth is round like an apple. And she brought out a piece of matzah bread to show that the Bible says the world is flat, and that's what they believe. So we can't send them out there. They want to debate. And the janitor comes back, and all the Jewish community say, what happened? And she said, he went like this to say, all you Jews get out of here. And I said, no, we're going to stay right here. And then he said, don't be insolent with me. And she said, and I said, you're 3 times as insolent asking us to leave. And then he took out an apple for me, and I figured it was lunchtime, so I took up my matzah. It takes chutzpah to be a mensch, but not necessarily academic achievements or titles. Now, I read about a mensch in a letter to an advice columnist, Ann Landers, whom probably some of you are old enough to remember. The letter was from a woman not far from here in Rockford, Illinois. She said in her letter that she had gone through months of chemotherapy And when she'd gone back for a checkup, she found out that she had more cancer. She had no one to turn to, she said. She was divorced. Her family and relatives were not all that supportive. And she says, I was the first person in the family to have cancer, and they didn't know how to behave toward me. They tried to be kind, but I had the feeling they were afraid it was contagious. They kept their distance and called on the phone to see how I was doing. This really hurt. Last Sunday, I headed for the laundromat. You see the same people there. They say good morning and make small talk. I was trying to not look depressed, but my spirits were really low. As I was taking my laundry out of the car, I looked up and saw a man, one of the regulars, leaving with his bundle, and he smiled and said, good morning, how are you today? I lost control of myself, and I blurted out, this is the worst day of my life. I have more cancer. And then I began to cry. He put his arms around me and just let me sob. And then he said, I understand. My wife has been through it. After a few minutes, I felt better and thanked him for his understanding, and I proceeded with my laundry. About 15 minutes went by, and in came the man and his wife. And she walked over to me and said, without saying a word, hugged me and said, feel free to talk to me. I was where you are now. I know what you're going through. And then she ends the letter, and I hope God gives me the chance to do for someone else what that wonderful woman did for me. Meanwhile, please let your readers know that even though there are a lot of hard-hearted people in this world, there are some incredibly generous and loving ones too. Sign me, a witness in Rockford, Illinois. There are a lot of benches out there. And a lot in here, too, I think. And you don't have to wait around for the right opportunity to come along for you to be a Mensch. You see, that woman who wrote the letter said she hoped God would give her the chance to help someone else with the way she was helped. But the truth is, there are already opportunities around you. There are people around you with no visible scars who are hurting and who need the presence of a real human being, a Mensch, to affirm them. So I have a little homework assignment for you today. What I'd like you to consider is trying an experiment with me. Everyone you meet today, maybe tomorrow too, but everyone you meet, whether it's people you know well or strangers, I'd like you to imagine that you can see two things inside them. The two things inside every person are a bright light and a wound. If you would remember that and see it in all the people you come in contact with, I think you will find that becoming a Mensch comes fairly naturally. Everyone has a light inside them, a goodness, a brightness, a Menschness. And everyone also has a wound, which sometimes keeps their light from shining as brightly as it might otherwise. When you see someone that you're having problems with, whether it's maybe your partner or a family member or a workmate or a member of the congregation, or simply a stranger who cuts ahead of you in line, see that inside of them is this great light, this potential Mensch, and also see that they carry a wound of some kind, a wound that you may never completely understand. It may be a physical wound, like cancer or heart disease. It may be something less visible, like childhood abuse or neglect or trauma of some kind. Or it could be a desperate need for attention because they never quite got the love or affirmation they needed as a child. But when they do something annoying that really tests your patience, remember that they really have a light inside. It's just their wound which keeps it from shining clearly. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't say anything about people's obnoxious behavior. They may need to hear it, and maybe you should confront it. But if you remember their light and their wound, you're more likely to confront them like a Mensch. So that's my homework assignment for today and for any day you want to be a Mensch. Every person you see, remember that they have a ticket to Mensch inside, which you can encourage, and they have a wound, which maybe you can help heal through a listening ear or a holding hand. And remember also that you have a light and a wound. So be a mensch to yourself too. You know, there was a little kid who visited the TV studio where Sesame Street was produced, and this kid later wrote to Big Bird. His letter said, "Dear Big Bird, the other kids were fooled, but not me. I know that you're not really a giant bird. I know that you wear a costume. I know that inside your costume you are a regular, normal little bird." Well, I'm here to tell you there's nothing normal about you at all. You've got something inside you much bigger than Big Bird, and you can fly much higher too. You are Mensch. Maybe you're only a quarter-time Mensch right now, but I guarantee you could at least be half-time. So get off your tuchus, get off your ticket, and be the Mensch you were meant to be. A women and amen.